Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday, everyone. It is currently 12:30, and we will now be kicking off this webinar around practical sustainability steps for suppliers and schools to meet the Department for Education's Sustainability and Climate Change Strategy, or we'll just call it the DfE Strategy for short. So welcome to our first webinar and series around this topic. And we're really glad to see you, really glad that you're all here, and really looking forward to your questions and thoughts. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. My colleague Brian will be handling them in the back end. But without further ado, let's kick this off, as we're running quite a tight schedule, as we want to adhere as closely as possible to your lunch hour and be as considerate as we can. So just a bit about myself. My name is Ewan Chan. My background is primarily within human rights due diligence within supply chains, especially around countering slavery and human trafficking in businesses globally. I've helped businesses spread out across the Asia Pacific and European regions. However, since I've joined Valuematch, I've played a key role in not only developing and driving our sustainability benchmarking services, but also around human rights training, supply chain services, and leading Valuematch's human rights strategy, as well as mainly leading our sustainable schools assessment service at Valuematch. And so it's great to have you all with us today, and I look forward to hearing what you think about the session and any questions that you have. So without further ado, let's answer the first question. So why is sustainability important to schools? So in our view, and for many other schools, we call schools a critical junction. This is where the priorities of different areas converge. So the first area where schools are a critical junction is that schools are places where the goals and people of different groups and communities converge, such as the community's workforce, local government, parents, and especially children. Children, they're the future of those communities, which is incredibly important. The second area on screen is that schools are a convergence area for environment, as they tend to own large amounts of land. One report from Schools Week said that the amount of school surplus land is about the size of central London, and this amount of land could be used to improve community welfare, environmental, and climate resilience. And finally, schools are ultimately where the future generation is equipped with the skills and values needed to become leaders of the future. And so while schools have wide-reaching impact because of the first two areas of community and environment, arguably the largest impact will actually be on children, as they will take the mantle of caring for our world and for each other when we're long gone. So because of the schools' role as a critical junction, schools are actually on a front line of major sustainability and well-being challenges facing youth and wider communities. So schools play a central role in safeguarding children and equipping them with the life skills, especially after weathering the isolation of the pandemic period. And furthermore, on the climate change side, large amounts of young people are actually experiencing symptoms of climate change-induced mental health strain. And this is also unsurprising, given that almost half of schools in the UK are actually at risk of flooding, with more being added to that list by 2050. And we simply have no choice but to act on all of this before it's too late. So moving on to the side for private sector and SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, why are SMEs important? So some important traits of SMEs that we need to consider are that, one, SMEs provide local jobs. According to Study Smarter, one of the main reasons people move from rural areas to cities is for employment and education opportunities. And so when local jobs are provided by SMEs in a local area, especially in non-urbanized areas, it creates a stronger likelihood that locals can find jobs near where they live. And on top of that, larger businesses actually value SMEs a lot for their ability to respond faster, and in not only that, but also in a more personalized way to their needs, according to an OCR international study. Economic deprivation is a major issue in many areas of the UK, and because of business presence and job opportunities from SMEs, communities are more able to keep money within the community to help local areas thrive. So local businesses tend to also try to source from other local businesses too, which helps the whole case. And finally, SMEs won't usually have as much of an environmental footprint as larger businesses do, and this is because SMEs don't usually build infrastructure for themselves as much, which usually results in less loss of green space and less use of harmful materials. So what is the role of SMEs in the larger private sector and sustainability? So according to a study from OCR International, referenced previously in 2012, this actually looks at the relationship between SMEs, larger businesses, and the wider private sector supply chain. And based on that study, roughly 77% of SMEs see themselves as being part of a supply chain in which they are providing to larger businesses either directly or indirectly. And this is really important to know because as we move forward, larger businesses are actually facing a lot tighter and tighter legislative pressure to account for net zero, for social value, for human rights. And they'll increasingly be putting pressure on SMEs within their own supply chains to deliver on those commitments too. So failing to account for net zero goals or human rights protections in your own SME business and supply chain could potentially mean losing out on some really great advantages, as larger businesses actually need SMEs in their supply chain to provide specialist services at an economic cost. So being able to keep working with larger businesses going forward actually enables SMEs to have more reliable income streams, a boosted reputation as a result of working with the larger business. And finally, it results in upskilling in various areas because larger businesses usually train SMEs in areas such as tech. So sustainability and keeping up with legislation is also a very must-have for SMEs to maintain an edge and a sustainable operating moving forward. So moving towards a DfE strategy, in 2021, the Department for Education in the UK released its sustainability and climate change strategy, covering 5 key areas, which outlines a major need for both private and education sectors to overhaul their sustainability for operations and supply chains. Now, just going through them briefly, the 5 areas are on screen, namely, climate education, so utilizing schools' infrastructure as education opportunities for students. Green skills and careers, so the DfE is working to support schools in providing green education and career opportunities for students. Education, estate, and digital infrastructure enhancements to make emissions reporting for schools mandatory. Operations and supply chains, so these are things like having sustainability leads and climate action plans by 2025, using procurement to minimize waste and carbon, and schools will soon have to start reporting on their food procurement impact as well. International, the 5th area on the very right-hand side of the screen, we're not going to look at too much because that's mainly around how the UK government's going to take learnings from the education sector locally to share best practice internationally. So while there are the 5 broad areas of focus in the strategy, the middle 3 are the highest focus immediately, such as developing green skills and careers in communities, decarbonizing existing and new infrastructure with reportable outcomes, and driving decarbonization through supply chains and internal operations. Some of the most immediate duties for schools were mentioned already, such as having sustainability leads and climate action plans by 2025, begin the reduction of use of single-use products and minimizing waste, and beginning to procure food from lower carbon sources and local sources. So seeing the forest from the trees. So while the DfE's strategy document is a hefty piece of policy sitting around 40 pages long on my personal PDF, it can broadly be understood and actioned as a stair-step approach. So it's where first schools must develop a culture and leadership structure that prioritizes sustainability. Then it needs to outlive those values in all procurements and operations and infrastructure, and then uses all of these components to build the capacity of the young people in its care, to give them career opportunities, development, and prepare them for the green industrial revolution. So while this strategy mainly applies to climate action, we know for sure that sustainability issues are all deeply interconnected, which means that broader areas of sustainability like human rights and social value cannot be afforded to be neglected and have to be factored into the strategy as well. So now to the meat of the topic. What are the steps that schools can take to start adhering to the DfE strategy? We'll talk about supplier steps later, but we'll talk about schools first. So the joint first steps are that schools, that's trusts or individual settings, should be doing is to establish a climate action plan and establish sustainability leadership in their school. So looking at climate action plans first, this plan should cover 4 broad areas according to the Department for Education guidance, namely how your trust will move towards net zero and towards decarbonizing. This should involve a baselining of one's carbon emissions first, so that you have a measurable point to work forward from. Secondly, your trust should also be working to, how it will enhance the estate and work to adapt it and make it resilient to climate change risks like flooding or overheating. It should also cover how your trust will promote biodiversity, such as through participation in the National Education Nature Park, which is a virtual platform that all schools can participate in. And finally, your plan should involve how your trust will promote climate education in schools to enhance students and staff, as well as contribute towards green career opportunities. And the second joint item on this list is to establish sustainability leadership in your school settings across either the setting level, the trust level, or both if you want to. This can be a person, a sustainability lead, or it can be a sustainability team that are in charge of delivering the sustainability agenda. And ideally, according to guidance, the leadership team for this area should be made up of diverse and passionate individuals spanning across teaching and operational departments like education, estates, and operations. This ensures that multiple angles within the school's operations and day-to-day workings are covered and are addressed in a unified approach that is most likely to be successful and achieved. And on top of that, having senior leadership being part of that team and being part of decision making is absolutely vital, as they have the authority and the capacity to drive trust and setting-wide change. So not only are these two items critical because they need to be done by 2025, but they also make sense from a leadership and a planning perspective to ensure a coordinated approach. So next, what are the steps that suppliers can take to start adhering to the DfE strategy? So one of the DfE's goals is to actually encourage schools to procure from suppliers committed to net zero. So if this is going to be the case, suppliers need to be starting to commit to net zero themselves to contribute to this. And so our top recommendation for suppliers, especially SMEs, is to develop a carbon reduction plan and to annually review it. We personally recommend that suppliers follow the PPN 0621 standard for carbon reduction plans, as this means that your plan adheres to standards in the wider public sector procurement space and not just education sector as well. So one key thing to note is the importance of Scope 3 within your carbon reduction plan, as it said that around 70% of emissions will come from Scope 3 for most businesses. And Scope 3, for those who don't know, includes areas like upstream supply chains, waste generated from operations, business travel, employee commuting, and downstream transport and distribution. So another recommendation we also give is for suppliers to conduct sustainability benchmarking. So this mainly looks at your business's overall, it looks at your business overall to identify where strengths and sustainability gaps are and identifies where quick wins could be made. And additionally, in our experience of doing these benchmarking assessments, we found that they're actually incredibly useful tools for persuading and communicating to senior leadership about which areas of the business needs to improve and why. So it's a really good internal communication piece as well, we found. So we're going to look at one case study. So in our experience, we know 100% that procurement is a really great lever for driving sustainability change that utilizes supplier and schools to collaborate for positive outcomes. So in this case study, we actually helped a multi-academy trust in England re-procure their catering services. And through this, we actually managed to achieve the following impact on screen. So we managed to save money on the contract. So we saved about 29% over a 5-year period across the entire catering menu. So this means that finances are released for areas that the school may want to prioritize, such as future sustainability initiatives. Green training was also provided to staff and also achieved around 8 to 10% of savings through provision of this training. So students were also provided career opportunities, as 2 apprenticeship opportunities were committed to be provided annually by the supplier as part of the contract. And finally, environmental protection and biodiversity was promoted in the contract through setting goals to achieve the minimum of the Bronze Soil Association standard, which involves commitments such as fish being procured from the Marine Conservation Society approved sources, meat that satisfies animal welfare standards, and menus that are seasonal in nature and procurement. So this case study actually shows us what can be done through day-to-day operations and procurement, and if they are contracted in and run compliantly. So through this, your money can actually be mobilized for environmental protection and social value generation on a day-to-day level rather than on a one-off grant-provided level. These on the screen is just another few examples of the same case study impacts. You can read about this more when we share the slide deck later after this webinar. So remember that we talked about climate action planning and carbon reduction planning. So at Valuematch, one of our key services for suppliers is actually to help you conduct your carbon baselining process and to work with you to help create a PPN 0621 compliant carbon reduction plan, or CRP. And we do this in partnership with our partners from Carbon Footprint. So this can be completed over the course of a few weeks and opens you up to a lot more opportunities within the public sector procurement space, not just in education. And it represents a fairly lower effort but higher impact piece of policy development for your business. And on top of that, we have a free carbon calculator that you can use on our website to assist in this process. However, if you would like support for this process, as well as independent verification of these calculations, please do indeed get in touch with us. We're very welcome to that. On the note of sustainability benchmarking, whether your organization needs help with just one area or you need to understand how responsible and sustainable you are overall, our unique social impact and improvement model has been developed to assess where you sit against best practice and is proportionately done against the size of your organization. So we perform a detailed assessment across 6 key category areas with 4 levels of maturity aligned to the UN SDGs, Sustainability Development Goals, the UK government social value model, as well as other relevant legislation and policy. The 6 areas that we look at are environmental management, human rights and labor standards, equality, diversity and inclusion and belonging, resource use and circular economy, social value delivery, and health and well-being. This model has actually been quite successful. We've done this for businesses such as SMEs all the way to multinational construction companies, and we've actually created a lot of actionable insights through this model. Looking at how we can support schools, another area we work in is the Sustainable Schools Assessment, which aims to help schools achieve these 3 areas and compliance to the DfE strategy. So our goal is to help schools to become places that steward the environment. As youth develop a sense of urgency to protect their environment, so too should schools work towards providing future generations an environment that's worth protecting. And strengthening communities. So, strong communities are absolutely core to sustainable prosperity and resilience. So schools need to ensure that their activities contribute positively to the future of not just students, but the wider community as well. And safeguarding people, finally. Strong communities are made up of healthy individuals, and schools must have an ability not only to protect those inside of them, but also outside of them. So the Sustainable Schools Assessment, the model is our approach of lining up our sustainability consulting services with our sustainable procurement services into an approach that can be replicated across different multi-academy trusts. The process mainly looks at operations and policies and procurement efficiency to analyze for gaps and strength. And the output of this process is a Sustainable Schools Assessment report outlining the analysis, the findings, and the recommendations from which we'll collaborate with your trust to develop an action plan for implementation. So while climate change can be quite a depressing topic, schools, SMEs, and larger businesses have a unique opportunity to now be trailblazers in protecting the future for ourselves and for future generations. So sustainability not only leads to more security for future generations, but also does lead to savings and positive impacts for the present, as seen on screen and in the case study I showed before. These are some of the case studies on screen that you can see that can come from sustainability in your organization. So Valuematch over time, we've already been conducting services contributing towards all of these goals, and on screen we've put down some of the key action areas we've identified from the DfE strategy and what expertise we can provide for it. Things like carbon calculations, reduction planning to meet emissions reporting, and also this can also meet climate action plan requirements. We also provide capacity for improving procurement ethics, efficiency, waste reduction, circular economy, especially in focus areas like the DfE's strategy, such as food, single-use products, and uniforms procurement. And if supply chains are where the most of the unknown human rights risks and carbon emissions reside, then that's particularly where action needs to be taken. All of this can be governed through policy benchmarking and development through the social impact and improvement model and the sustainable schools assessment model from Valuematch. And through this, we can support sustainability teams in schools with the expertise and knowledge we have to lead sustainable development in schools. And finally, just letting you know that our next webinar in the series will be at the same time as today, but on July 3rd, where we'll cover what are the first steps that businesses and schools can take to protecting the environment together. And we'll look at what low-hanging fruit are for businesses and schools in this area, supply chain opportunities for circular economy initiatives, and finally, practical steps going forward for those, as well as case studies of what we've done around these topics in the past. So without further ado, that's the end of the presentation. I hope it's been really useful and really excited to hear what questions you have. If you want to get in touch, I've put a QR code on the top right corner of the screen for LinkedIn if you want to get in touch, but equally my email and my phone number there. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to ask. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining for this webinar, and the floor is now open for questions and answers.
Hi, Ewan. There are no questions yet.
Right, not a problem. We'll just give some time for people to roll in with their questions if they have any at all.
Hi, Ewan. First question from Julie Rowlands. Could we signpost our smaller suppliers to you? If so, what can we tell them the likely costs might be?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Laura, would you like to comment on this first? I can try to pull up the prospective cost as well.
No, it's fine. I think sorry, Brian, can you just repeat the question, please, just so I'm clear?
Could we signpost our smaller suppliers to you? If so, what can we tell them the likely costs might be?
Okay, so I think the costs will vary depending on kind of what services smaller suppliers or SMEs want to take. I think it's just the first step is probably just reaching out so we can have like an informal discussion and talk through kind of what your needs are, and then we can kind of tailor a proposal that is right, and kind of tailor and sort of collaboratively develop a proposal that works in the best way. It's quite difficult to just kind of give estimates of costs without kind of really understanding what the ask is. So I just encourage you to reach out to you or myself or Brian, and we'll be really happy to just have a chat via Teams, and then we can work that through. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, the costs will also depend on the business size as well.
Yeah.
So that's a huge factor at play. So really, it's through conversation that we sort of figure that out. But thanks for the question, though, Julie.
Ewan.
Any other
No
questions?
problems.
No, Brian?
No further questions.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just stay on for a few more minutes just to see if anybody has any further questions. But if not, we could potentially close this early and let everyone have more of a break for their lunch break.
You have another question from John. do you think schools are really understanding the Department for Education strategy and how to integrate it?
Ooh, interesting question. Could you repeat it one more time, please?
Yeah. Do you think schools are really understanding the Department for Education strategy and how to integrate it?
I think to be honest, there's a few levels of either misunderstanding or not being aware of the strategy. So some schools that I chat with, some of them don't even know that the DfE strategy exists and they have to go read up on it, or their first exposure to it is me doing a pitch on sustainable schools assessments and introducing them to the strategy. And on the other hand, I think for those that understand the sustainability and climate change strategy, I think what they tend to struggle with is where the first steps they should take are. And so what I think is really helpful is us trying to identify where the low-hanging fruits are in terms of sustainable action, in procurement and operations as well. So I think in terms of integrating it, that's one of the areas that we primarily support with, especially through the commercial discovery process that we do, which looks at a school's procurement spend to see where efficiencies could be achieved. And then on top of that, we also have the retained procurement service that actually helps to deliver procurements compliantly and with certain environmental and social value outcomes being contracted as part of the process. Sustainable Schools mainly looks at policies and governance to sort of guide that process. So I think in terms of how to integrate it, usually it's through a conversation and through working together that we identify that. But I think there's still a lot of work to do in terms of getting schools to care about the sustainability and climate change strategy. And then on top of that, helping to identify what the first steps are. But that's a really great question, though.
Thank you. And I don't think there's any more questions.
All right.
Okay.
No problem then in that case. I think we can probably drop off this call now then. Enjoy the rest of your lunch, everyone. It was great to see you all. If you have any further questions at all, please don't hesitate to email. Have a great day and a great rest of the week. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian.